Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is John Storyk. He is an architect of some renown, I would say. Closing in on 4,000 venues now?
3,000 to 4,000 projects. They're studio rooms, radio stations, small theaters, even a
Performing
few large
arts
ones.
centers, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some performing arts, AV systems. The Wellspring is recording studios.
Mm-hmm.
Still doing them, still love doing them. Actually, almost more than ever, and we should talk about that because we're in a very, very interesting moment in the studio world. Sort of half the universe thinks they're going away, and then the other half that actually knows what's going on realizes they're absolutely not going away. As a matter of fact, anything but. One of my partners now said, you know what we do? We're at the nexus of architecture, acoustics, and technology. And that's that's almost every project of ours has those three elements in them. If it doesn't have something of those three elements, we're probably not the right guys to talk to. Now, having said that, we have some architecture projects that have little technology, and we have a number of projects now that have a lot of technology and not that much architecture.
Like that's interesting.
Well, like AV systems design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, we're
You're
doing
doing
the
mainly
design for
the
stadium.
infrastructure, but you're not really doing the architecture.
Well, or someone else is doing it.
Uh-huh.
So we have to appreciate the architecture, but we're not responsible for it.
Right.
Okay, because business has grown. It went from just me, and it's now 50 to 60 people.
But the understanding
things
of
have
the
gotten
architecture, obviously informs your ability to communicate with the architects, even if you're just
People
doing
ask
the infrastructure.
me all the time because, like you, I enjoy teaching. I come out of a university. I mean, first of all, I come from a family that endorsed education, third generation Jewish immigrants. All that my folks, specifically my dad, ever wanted was that my brother and I, and now extended family members, got an education. To him, that was his legacy. Everything else really didn't mean that much to him. And he was a very successful businessman.
But that does mean a lot.
It means
really
everything.
does.
Education is
Absolutely.
strength and power, and also then becomes love, and then somehow the arts wiggle their way in there.
Well, we hope so, because the arts are what's responsible for critical thinking, which is part of education.
If there's no arts, as George Clooney just said the other night on that his interview was pretty cool, actually. He says, you might as well just stare at a blank wall and throw in the towel if there's no arts. If there's no art, the whole thing doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
But the teaching thing, which is what I wanted to talk to you about, has always been there. And it turns out I really love teaching. I enjoy teaching. I went to a university that sort of had steeped into its tradition, a kind of Socratic notion of teaching. Teachers teach students, students teach teachers. And so that, combined with the fact that I studied architecture, which is by definition a kind of a studio teaching setting rather than sitting down taking tests.
Yes.
Okay.
It's participatory.
Very. If you're not drawing and sharing your drawings, there's no reason to even be there. And so the teaching thing has always been super important. So because of that, I get a lot of students, and they, as I say when I start teaching, I say, you know what I'm really looking for here is a question that I haven't heard before. Now, generally speaking, most of the questions I have heard before.
Sure.
Some are technical, some are silly, like what was Jimi Hendrix like? Okay, we got to go through that. But generally speaking, most students sooner or later come around to asking the question, how do I get started? They might ask it in a different way. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they'll say, could you tell us how you got started? But really what they want to know is how can they get started?
Well, and how you got started is almost irrelevant since
it's not almost irrelevant, it is irrelevant.
Yeah, different era.
Except for one thing, which I don't mind telling the story, it's okay. As long as you come out of it with a passion for the word serendipity.
Yes,
Because if you understand that word, then maybe you could take away something from my story. But what I and then people want to know, some people get very interested in the line of work that they think we're in, okay, which is very different from what, I mean, when you open up our webpage and you see a finished product, that's actually not what we do every day. That's like somebody reading your finished book and saying, oh, this
Right.
is really cool. You sit down and you just write this finished book.
Right.
Yeah, that's not exactly what happened. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's funky and it's messy and it's dirty and it's
Well, the creative process is messy.
Exactly. So I tell people, I said, I can't really tell you how to start. I can't, so of course, is there a course I can take? That's a Gen X bullshit, Okay, can I quickly learn everything and then just become well known? I said, no.
My favorite these days is there a hack?
Yeah, is there a hack? Is there a video? Is there a course? Is there, okay, and that comes from, trying to learn everything in 3 minutes.
Right.
What I do remind people, I said, I don't know how one could do what I do and what my key creative people do. I mean, not everybody in our team is creative. We have administrative people and support people and whatnot, but we have a lot of creative people. I don't know how you can do it without knowing something about music, something about tech, and something about architecture. I just don't see how you can really move forward with this unless you have some sort of love for those and maybe acquire some skill. So that nexus conversation that I had, I think, kind of hits it on the nose. Okay?
Yeah.
Having said that, I also remind people, I said, when you're at school, make sure to read Shakespeare because you will have to learn how to cry. Okay, and I guarantee you're not going to learn it at the Berkeley MP&E class. Okay, but you will be told you're going to get fired. You're going to be told that you didn't do a good job. People are going to say leave, and they're going to just walk out of the room, and you're not going to know what to do. Just actually happened to a student of mine. Okay, and you might learn how to deal with that stuff because it's actually really going to happen.
It's part of life.
And it's part of life, and that's where your best and highest growth spurts will happen when you deal with those moments. Anybody can
Adversity.
learn Pro Tools. Not that hard to learn Pro Tools. Okay, it's much harder to learn how to deal with a mix when you worked really hard, think it's fantastic, and your client comes in and says this is awful.
Well, it's also part of what I told students a lot of times in my classes is I can teach you how to run a compressor, but I can't teach you when to keep your mouth shut. It's learning about human interaction. It's learning about the creative process. It's learning about how humans communicate.
Yeah. So it's been fun. I mean, I'm 76. We'll get that out. Okay. Youngish 76.
You look good for your age.
I've been blessed with good health, reasonable looks, a lot of energy. Got an early start. Quote, in this industry, it starts when I'm 22. I mean, I really have had a love for architecture since I was 11.
That's one of the things I want to ask you about because very few
So it's been
people,
a long time.
Yeah, but very few people at that point in their lives really know what they want to do. And typically, even if they think they know, they end up somewhere way left of that. So it's interesting that you had that passion so early on.
Well, I don't know why this happened or how this happened, but I know for a fact that I loved architecture and even thought about it as a career as early as 11 because I actually have a paper that I wrote in 7th grade or, I don't know, 6th grade or 8th grade, maybe it was 13, some very young age, and interviewed an architect in my hometown in suburban Long Island. Then in high school, for multiple summers, I worked either in an architect's office or I took drafting classes.
Oh, wow.
I, of course, entered Princeton in architecture school. By the time I was 18, there was no doubt that I wanted to be an architect. And I could actually draw and draft very quickly. This is when everything was by hand.
And those were slide rule days, too.
Oh, I graduated from college without a computer.
Wow.
Without a phone, well, certainly without a phone, but without a handheld computer.
Yeah.
No slide rule. But that was T-squares and drawing and pencil, and I knew how to do all that. And when you went to a school like Princeton, Princeton's not a technical school. I remember well, are we going to take a drafting class? And Michael Graves was my teacher, was my young professor at the time. He says, we're not teaching you that here. You need to learn that on your own. I said, I already know how to do that. He says, well, okay, then you're in good shape. Okay, and so I graduated easily at the age of 22, now with, at the time, a really, really good education in I guess what, for lack of a better word, one would call theoretical or academic architecture. The teachers at the time at Princeton at that time was really one of the ground zero spots for teaching. My professors were Charlie Gwathmey, Michael Graves, Peter Eisenman.
Wow.
I mean, the ground zero for architecture kind of moves around. Sometimes it's at Harvard, Cornell, University of Texas, UCLA, USC, Princeton, Yale, Paris, Berlin. For those few years, our guest lecturers, I mean, I had Philip Johnson reviewed one of my drawings once. I mean, it was pretty interesting times. And of course, 64 to 68, right in the middle of the changing moment in life. And I was in a band. I was in a blues band.
Now that's the other thing. You did have a passion for music, and
Well,
music
thanks.
and architecture, both very mathematical, very left brain, right brain balance in a way.
Dad insisted. I grew up listening to classical music. I took piano lessons. I still play piano. There's a keyboard right there. And then I took, you joined the concert band in high school.
Of course.
I don't know. Hey, clarinet. That looks like a good instrument. And I got good at it. First clarinet, blah, blah, blah. And when I went into Princeton, I was in the marching band for 3 years.
Playing clarinet?
Clarinet,
All
marching
right.
band with a uniform and everything.
All right.
But I was also in a rock band, I was in a bar band, and then I was in a blues band for the last 2 years, a really good blues band, a band that looked, it felt a little bit like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or, we played Stax stuff and blues stuff. We had horns. And so I played keyboard, organ. I had a Farfisa and a Hammond B3.
All
Pretty
right.
cool. Yeah, Farfisa driving a B3.
Ooh.
And which was heavy to move. And one day, and we had 2 horns and a rhythm guitar player that jumped on tenor sax every now and then. I said, how hard can it be for me? I'll get a sax. I go to Manny's in New York, went down Princeton down the road, jump in. I said, okay, let me see a tenor, and I bought some reeds, and I just want to try it out. I can't get it to blow. I just can't get a note out of that damn thing. It's too
Just
big.
needs too much wind or what?
I don't know, mouthpiece not comfortable. I said, well, how about an alto? Brings out an alto. I buy a few more reeds, new mouthpiece, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, this is good. How hard can this be? Great. Can't be that hard. Go back, not realizing, of course, that the tenor is B flat, clarinet B flat. I've been playing B flat since I was 10. I know how to transpose, no problem. And the alto is E flat. So that caused a little wrinkle for a few weeks, but we got over that. And so I bounced back and forth for 2 years between organ and horn. And even when I graduated from Princeton, getting a job immediately in an architect's office, moved to New York with my then girlfriend, who became my wife because she was underage and I had to marry her. We set up shop in Greenwich Village in a very exciting summer of 1968, time of our life. I actually thought I was going to be a musician. We were playing gigs, we were making money at night.
There was quite
Weekends.
a scene there back then too.
But I had a day job because I paid the rent and whatnot. And life unfolded. There it is. It's June. It's July. It's summer of '68. Very exciting times. And now comes the story that's pretty well documented that you've either seen or you should see. It's that I literally, when waiting for an ice cream one August hot evening. Now, of course, when you wait for something,
Right.
Well, this didn't exist in 1968. So what do? You just sort of pick up a copy of the East Village Other or the whatever local rag was sitting there, and I'm reading through it, and I go through the ads. I said, I want it. I'm just looking. Maybe it was a little high, maybe. carpenters wanted to work for free on experimental nightclub with a phone number.
And this appealed to you.
At that moment, it did. 10 cents, rotary phone, ring, 30 minutes later, Upper West Side, and I'm with these crazy guys that have this idea for this experimental nightclub in a loft in Soho. I never even heard of Soho. And I meet these guys. I meet a whole nother universe, literally on that evening. And they have this idea for a sensorium, an experimental nightclub that you would go in and change your clothes into gowns and walk through, and there'd be lights, and guides would bring drinks out. So it was a kind of a cross between theater and a club and a dance hall.
Immersive in a sense.
Not even in a sense, okay? It's been the stuff of doctoral theses. It was in 2 exhibits 2 years ago in Europe. Whenever anybody looks at clubs from the 60s and 70s, and there's a lot of people that look at clubs from the 60s.
Clearly, yes.
People, I must get a call every 3 months. Can you tell me? Because I'm the only one still alive. So I looked at this thing and I said, you know, I'll bang some nails at night. I was always a little handy. But if you let me redesign it and tweak it up. They did. I redesign it, draw it, work on the team to get it built. It opens in November. It's on the cover of Life magazine in February, and life changes for me overnight. I'm still 22. Still working in a day office, okay, and still in the blues band with the 16-year-old girlfriend wife, okay, who I'm still in touch with, Geraldine, okay, and if you were in New York at that time, that winter of 68, 69, there were a few things you would go to. This is one of them. You'd go to the Electric Circus, or you'd go to Cerebrum. There were just a few things you would go to in the then much smaller downtown art scene.
Sure.
Okay. And, oh, what a shock. One night, Jimi Hendrix went there. I knew of Jimi Hendrix. I'm not a guitar player, so never really been, but I mean, it was hard to not know who Jimi Hendrix was, and the music, I love the music. And he's and his manager are in the process of now taking over the lease for what was then the Generation. Now, the Generation is in the basement of 52 West 8th Street. You're going to connect the dots pretty quick here. That's Electric Ladyland. It becomes, okay.
Yeah.
So why is that significant? Because let's go back now 2 years when I'm in a blues band in Princeton, New Jersey. So if you're in a blues band in Princeton, New Jersey in 1967, and you want to hear Buddy Guy or Junior Wells, you get on a bus, you go to New York, and you go to the Generation in the basement of the New York, of the Art Cinema building. It was a film theater. Okay? This building was designed by Frederick Kiesler in 1927.
So you're already enamored.
Well, I knew all about this building, but I didn't know where it was because I was a Frederick Kiesler fan. Unknown Viennese architect who really only did 2 buildings in his life. He did this building in 1927 because he knew somebody. He just came over from Vienna. Basically doesn't really do very much for 40 years. He's very hard to get along with, has a few exhibits. And then at the end of his life, 40 years later, in the mid-60s, designs the Dead Sea Scrolls Museum in Israel, which I knew all about. So I had the only real book on Frederick Kiesler. Michael Graves hated him. They hated anybody that had those kinds of curves and freeform shapes. So I knew about this theater, which was way ahead of its time. It was the first movie theater in the United States without a stage. Because early movie theaters were vaudeville theaters.
Right, of course.
This was a purpose-built movie theater that had cove lighting. The screen opened up and closed like a lens of an eye. And I knew all about it, but I didn't know where it was. And all those times when I would go to the Generation, I had no idea I was in the basement.
You didn't realize you were right on top of it.
No, I'm not from Manhattan. I never went, I didn't live in Manhattan. And I kind of never, by the 60s it had changed a little bit. That lens thing went away, but the cove lighting was still there. Never connected the dots. Well, okay, so one day I get a call. I get a call from Jimi Hendrix, not from him, from his secretary or his man. Would you like to do a club for Jimmy? Okay, and I go up to 37th Street and meet him and Michael.
And you knew this had been from
No, they
your
said
previous
Jimmy
club.
was at Cerebrum, and he said, we want the guy that did that to design my club.
Okay, makes sense.
I'm 22, and I just think this is what's supposed to happen when you're 22. Okay. I had there was no metric to compare it to. I said, as a matter of fact, my guess is I probably said, how'd you even get my phone number? I don't know. I have no idea. I can't.
As you say, serendipity.
I go up, I meet, I talk to him, and they wanted it to be white with a curve and changing lights and exactly what I had done at Cerebrum. And they wanted to record the acts in the club, which of course today doesn't sound like a particularly interesting idea, but then it was a very interesting idea.
Sure.
In fact, they didn't really know how to do it. Okay, it's not like you could, you didn't have this.
So let's see, late 60s. So we were into, at least at that point, 16 track or?
No, not even.
Were we
I
still
think
on?
Still on 8, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I created design with curves and shape curve thing. I still have the only drawing. I know for sure about the dates because the drawing has an April 69 date on it.
Uh-huh.
So somewhere between February and April of 69, this meeting happens. I don't keep a diary. I didn't have one anyway. And I'm really excited to be doing this. I still have my day job. I still have my band. and Jimmy loves the drawings. I have a little model, everything. And I get a call once on a Sunday. I remember this call from the person who's going to be the manager of the club, who used to manage Steve Paul's scene, but then they stole him. Jim Marin has passed away since, became Electric Lady manager for years. Now, they changed their mind. Eddie Kramer, who I had met briefly, didn't know him, lifetime friend, godfather, with Bob Margoloff, also my daughter's godfather. I talk to Eddie twice a week. Lives in Canada now. Eddie has reminded Jimmy and Michael that their recording bill is $300,000-$400,000 a year. This is in 1969. That's a lot of money.
And that's more than he's been spending at the club.
You guys do not need a club. Eddie doesn't want to have anything to do with the club. He wants his own studio. He's just come over from Olympic or whatever. You need your own studio. And they shift it. And they tell me, well, we're not going to do the club. And I, of course, want to strangle Eddie because there goes my... And they said, but you can stay on and do the club. I said, guys, I've never been in
You mean the studio?
I don't really know too much about studios. I took one acoustics class. They said, well, see what you can learn, and we'll hire Phil Ramone as a consultant, which they did. I quit my job within a matter of weeks. I quit my job, found an acoustics engineer who was really doing mostly radio stations, kind of boring, dry stuff, but knew all that you had to know about isolation and details. Read everything I could read. There was like 3 books at the time, okay? And created my own internship. Bob Hansen was his name. I don't know if Bob is alive anymore. I just don't think he is. I said, I'll work for you for free. I'll do all your drafting on all your projects, including Electric Lady Studios, if you can just teach me and show me and mentor me. And so this is where that Princeton education paid off because mentoring and internship and lecture and then small groups, 6 and 7 people. Sometimes we'd have our classes under a tree in the good weather. Was instilled as a way of learning, and that's how I got through it. And by May, had the drawings for a studio, which then became Electric Lady Studios in the basement of 52 West 8th. I still, by the way, on that day, do not know that I'm in the basement of Frederick Easter's building. Let's get to that. Well, I'm 22 years old. Now I'm 23. I don't have a license. I can't file these drawings. So I get one of the guys where I'm in my office that I'm still working in. By the way, I soon resign. And they were heartbroken. I was a really fast draftsman. I was doing door schedules for a building in New Paltz, and I was drafting. I could draft very quickly. They offered me a raise. They couldn't believe it. They said, how'd you get a commission? How'd you get these commissions already at 23? I said, I don't. Okay. And, well, you could come in later if you want. You can wear headphones if you want. I said, no, I'm going to just go on my own. But I got one of the guys to stamp the drawings for me. So now we go down to the building department to file the drawing. Nobody does this. You hire people to do this. But I didn't know any better. We go down, we wait online. with Jim Marin, and out comes in tubes. Now it's all microfiche and digital. Those days are, of course, long since gone. And the drawings get rolled out for the building. They have the original 1927 filed drawings for the building that I'm amending now. And they're blue. This is when blueprints were really blue.
Right.
They haven't been blue for a long time. They don't use ammonia anymore. and they roll out, and I see Frederick Kiesler's name. I screamed in the building. I said, "Oh my God, that movie theater, that is the movie theater that I've been looking at the pictures of for the last 4 or 5 years as a student." And that was one of those, I'll never forget that moment in my life.
No kidding.
Oh no, this really happened. I don't know the exact day. I mean, I can kind of piece it together just from when things got built and when things opened. But I know exactly where I was. I could draw you a drawing of where the table I was on, and a window was in the distance, and I was with a plan examiner. It was just one of those moments that for me, it was like, are you serious? I'm designing, and I've been working in the basement of this guy's building, and I didn't even know it. And I've had a lifetime of those kinds of experiences. They happen almost weekly for me. And anyway, the studio, and then a year, 15 months later, it gets built. That's a whole story. Who cares? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And life changes on a dime. Before the studio is open, I have 3 more studios to design.
And Albert Grossman, that comes into play too.
I'm designing Albert's studio before Electric Lady opens. I went to Woodstock with Albert.
One of the things that I think is interesting, you talk about serendipity, but I'm also fascinated by the fact that you were already savvy enough to understand the whole idea of one hand washing the other. I'll bring you in. I got this gig. I'll bring you in to mentor me to do this gig. That's kind of fascinating.
That's interesting that you said that, because I've never quite had that pointed out. I'm also not conscious that I do that. So that's the best kind of skill to have, one that you actually, is just inside of you. I have to give my dad credit. I'm very loyal. So I think the flip side, the B side of the point you just made is essentially loyalty. If I find somebody that's passionate, and I see that their skill sets are growing, okay, and then I'm growing with them, I'm staying with them. I'm just going to stay with them. And I know there's always a better tool around. There's always a faster horse, but it's not about that. But on the flip side of all this, on the C side of the two-sided record, we have to also credit the times. These were times when passion and art were at the forefront of what's important. Those were times when complete optimism, everybody was passionate about art, everybody was passionate about music. It was a different time. So people say, how'd this all happen? How could this unfold so quickly? How did you make do? How'd you pay for things? And I'll look at people, I'll say, I always had enough money. I don't know. It just seemed like there was always enough. I don't know. There was always something to do. It seemed easy. That doesn't mean that I didn't have issues and problems. I rejected all. My dad was a businessman and wanted me to be a business person. And in fact, basically, upon leaving Princeton and moving to New York, and that sealed the deal on me not going into his business, which was an import-export commodities business, very successful. So we weren't very close for a number of years, and that I regret that. We then became very close when I realized that he had done the best he could and was an amazingly good man, maybe one of the best men I've ever known, and actually had instilled in me these traits that have now turned out to be correct. And he also recognized that, hey, he's a leader in his field. He's actually done what he...
You talk about serendipity, which of course is very important, and the times were certainly conducive. What I'm impressed about is the fact that even at a pretty young age, you understood human dynamics. You understood the idea of that it's not just about that everything is not transactional.
I think that comes from my folks, and I think that comes from a lot comes from Princeton. I remember on my 25th reunion, I asked one of my classmates who I've stayed in touch with, I said, what did we learn at Princeton? And he said, we learned how to talk. I mean, and he was not far off from it. What we learned was how to critically think and communicate.
And the communication aspect, I think, is invaluable, and on so many levels. When you talk about communications, most people think of formal business type communications, but I'm talking about the human to human.
Yeah, but everything, right now, everybody's doing this, and I'll see this happen sometimes, and I'll say, can you just pick up the fucking phone and call the guy? And then he'll talk back to you, and the sentence that he says may affect your next sentence, and da-da-da-da-da. Everything is, 73 digits and whatnot. I'm not comfortable with that. I know a lot of people are, but I don't think it fosters critical thinking. There's talking to somebody, okay, and there's communicating. And there are times when this is good. Hey, the 12 o'clock just changed to 12:30, and that person's driving, and they need. I mean, there are times when it's extremely useful. Okay. Anyway, before Electric Lady opened, I had 3 other studios to do, and I joke with everyone. I said, "Make your first studio famous." But there is a serious part of, obviously, there's a kind of jocular part of that. And a lot of that was, okay, if you're going to have a first one fall out of the sky, why not have that? Make it a good one. But you're not in charge, really, of the first one that falls out of the sky.
You're not in charge of anything.
Exactly. But it does talk to some useful, okay, it's important if you're accomplishing something that's worthwhile, there is some importance that should be played into making sure people know about it.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't completely poo-poo. Now people get ahead of that curve and all they do is pay attention to people knowing about it, and then you just get people talking and yelling and screaming and tick-tocking and all that bullshit. So one of those people that came along was Albert. Albert got introduced to me by a Princeton fellow, actually from a class below me, who was working for Albert, went on to become pretty famous producer, John Taplin. But at that time, in '67, I believe, was picking up amps for Judy Collins. And so I was introduced to Albert in somewhere 68-ish, maybe winter 69-ish. And he's Dylan's manager. He's Joan Baez. He's Peter, Paul, and Mary. Todd Rundgren, Foghat. Yeah. He's really at the peak. He's formed Bearsville Records. He's the king of Bearsville, which is right next to Woodstock, and he's expanding and growing. And he wants to build his own studio, which was a smart move for his artists. And John says, I know someone just out of Princeton who's doing it. And so we met, and on a napkin, doodled out his studio, and we became friends until his death. So he became a mentor of mine. And the only time in my life that I kind of left the New York area, I went to Colorado and lived there for a few years. And when I came back, it didn't work out. Albert gave me a room on 55th Street in his New York office, and he gave me a place to live on his estate in Bearsville. And me and one other guy, we were the only ones to live on there until he died. Wow. So I became essentially his house architect for all of his buildings. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of buildings: theater, video studio. We designed the recording studio, restaurants. I did a house for him in Mexico. I worked on a house in Coral Gables, and we became really good friends. I mean, we would see each other twice a week. And
he was a fascinating guy.
An extraordinary person, highly misinterpreted. I learned a lot from Albert. I learned a lot from Albert. So, yeah, critical thinking and communicating, and that's my university days have turned out to really be special that way. You don't need to go to an Ivy League school to get that. You just need to pay attention. You need to get a mentor. okay? And it's easy to get a mentor. It's not hard. Lots of people want to do it.
It's easy to get one, but you have to be receptive.
Exactly.
And for the most part, I think the mentors we receive are largely unexpected, aren't they?
I think the best ones are totally unexpected.
Exactly.
Circling back to my serendipity word. Yeah, you don't know when they're going to come. And also, they don't necessarily have to come in a young age. I mean, obviously, I have a lot of friends I've known for a long time. If you're 76, you're going to have, you know, and if someone is new in your life, they can't become a 45-year friend. But it doesn't mean they can't become a really good friend and a special person and a special mentor. That's why ultimately, when a student presses me very specifically for how they want to maybe go into this specific field, not in general, and every now and then some do, I said, I'd go get an internship with one of the guys that does this. That's me. We have an internship program. There's a few others. Just jump in.
Yeah, immersion.
For 3 months and see what this really looks like under the hood, because you might be shocked.
And you might decide that actually there's something else you want to do that you didn't even realize existed.
Well, all kinds of things are going to happen, and they're going to happen very quick. I mean, I have countless. We've had hundreds of interns. We have an intern program. We always have at least one. Every now and then two. Kind of can't. We don't have enough bandwidth for two. And we view them. It's 3 months. First month, they're not earning. They're more of a liability. Second month, it's even. Third month, they're an asset. Now, every now and then, you see someone who's an asset in the first week, and we end up paying them then. I don't want, if somebody's really, one such intern, after 2 weeks, I said, I'm hiring you. I said, do you want to work for us? He says, absolutely, I want to work for you. But I don't want to live in Highland, New York. I want to go back to Switzerland, where I'm from. He was a Full Sail graduate. I said, okay, well, let's just set up an office in Switzerland. He just looked at me. I thought he was, so this is someone I've known for 20 years now. He's my partner. Well, I'll jump to the end. I said, I don't know, you could set up a little shop there, get an office, get some jobs. We'll design them, you'll monitor them, and help, and we'll learn, and we'll just move forward, and we'll WSDG. By the way, where are you in Switzerland? Basel. Okay, Basel, where's that? So work up a little budget. We can pay for it every. So a week or two later, I said, how you doing on that budget? He's in the office, he's doing stuff. He said, I thought you were kidding. I said, no, I'm not kidding. Did it look like I was kidding? No, we're going to really, I don't know, what's it going to cost? $500 a month, $1,000 a month? Let's just go figure out what it is, an office rent. We need a coffee machine, got to have coffee in Europe. Okay, budget. He's my partner in Switzerland. He's my partner in the U.S. office. And he's going to probably take over and be the senior futurist, along with one or two other people. Over the last 4 years, Beth and I don't own 100% of the company anymore. It's all been transitioned. So over the years, you wouldn't notice because it's not something you need to pay attention to, but Walter's Storyk Design Group, because when we formed it, we weren't married yet, so it just sounded better than Storyk Walters. Women first. Then, of course, we got married, but we try not to use the names anymore. It's just WSDG, and we have many people who call now, they actually don't know what the letters mean. So we've accomplished what we had to accomplish. Because if I didn't do that, I'd be saddled with always having to, So now I'm just working on the design stuff that I want to work on. But I still work 8 to 10 hours a day. But it's not because I have to. It's because I want to, yeah. It is rare that a day goes by that I'm not looking at a drawing. Well, today I already looked at 3 drawings before you got over. Sketching and doodling. I mean, I'm not doing the drafting. I haven't done drafting in years, but I'm revising, looking. Josh, that door, it's swinging the wrong way. We got to get it this way. And you see this, we got to move that back 10 inches because I know we're going to need a base absorber. We're going to need a resonator there. It's got to be 8 inches deep. And this is my partner who's been around 20 years, and he'll just every night he'll say, how do you see this? How come I didn't see this? I said, you saw other things. But my point is that it's good. I love doing it. A new friend a relatively new friend in my life is Herb Alpert. Really only been in my life for about 4 or 5 years, and we've become pretty good friends. We chat every few weeks. And so he's on all of these projects for Harlem School of the Arts and UCLA, the theater that he sponsored there. He's been bringing me in to help on them, and based on that, we became friends. And I said, hey, Herb, you still play trumpet every day? He probably says, yeah. Looked at me like I had two heads. He says, yeah, 2-3 hours. I said, really? He says, yeah, pretty much every day. Yeah. I asked Emmanuel Axe, the great concert Bach, also new friend. We did his room up in the Berkshires. And I asked Manny, I said, you still play every day? He says, oh, yeah. I mean, he really looked at me like I had two heads. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I practice every single day. I asked Yo-Yo Ma the same question, laughed at me. I asked Harry Connick Jr., who's also become a little bit of a friend. He says, yeah, play every day. Mm-hmm. Every day.
So let me ask you a little bit of sort of a, not technical question, but maybe high-level technical question. The evolution of design of the studio. I mean, obviously, there's a continuity because you're not going to change the laws of physics. Certain things are going to remain the same, but the technology has changed in terms of the way we create music, the way we ingest music. In what sense has it impacted you, and in what sense does it still remain the same? Loaded question, I know.
Well, it is a loaded question, and pieces of it have been asked before, but pieces of it are being presented in a very, very new way. All things stay the same, but all things are different.
Yes.
That's the headline. But above that headline, I think is another headline. If you're not prepared to embrace both of those sentences, you will have a conflict. Yes. You're going to have a conflict. You're going to have a sticky moment, or something's going to go backwards, et cetera, et cetera. I think you need to fall in love with both sentences. And when you truly fall in love with both sentences, you are then living an artistic life rather than some other kind of life. Okay? Because all of art looks at past art.
Yes.
But has to look forward at the next note, the next word, the next chapter, the next color. But you're always looking backwards.
Yeah. So
a kind of a sneaky way to get around that question is, well, let's just list some of them and then, okay. So what hasn't changed, of course, is most of the laws of physics. Actually, the laws haven't changed. What does change is our ability to figure them out. Mm-hmm. So we've gotten a little smarter there. The other thing that hasn't changed, okay, is the need for the human dynamic in anything and everything we do, AKA programming. Yes. Okay? So the need to understand that hasn't changed. Then on the flip side, let's stay right with that one, okay? On the flip side of that, so if the need to understand programming hasn't changed, then what has changed is the programming itself. So why has that changed? Why do studios now look different? We know they're different. They're smaller. There's a gajillion of them. There's a tremendous amount of all-in-one room studios that don't have a traditional control room and studio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason is that the programming changed, the business model changed, the way we make music changed. So now we're going to dig deeper, and that's what you want to do is, why and how did that happen? Okay, so depends on how you want to look at it. If you're a technologist, like my friend Bobby Margoloff, he thinks that the technology is what's driven the music to change. Me, I take a different point of view. My point of view is that I think the artist has actually forced the technology to change. And probably it's a little bit of both. So for instance, if you were really smart at an AES in the, 80s or whenever it was, 90s, and you were walking around like we always used to do, and you saw a tiny little, not particularly interesting booth from Fraunhofer, where they first showed an MP3 or an MP4 or the first little experiments in digitizing music. And I can remember walking by and not paying much attention, because what you really wanted to pay attention to was big shit that you could buy and whatever. Yeah. Okay, but if you looked at it and you said, and realized what that guy had really figured out how to do, I got it about 2 years later. I'm not going to say I got it on day one, but I certainly didn't get it on day 5,000. And I didn't. And then when I finally realized that I didn't get scared of it, I said, "Oh, I see what's going to happen. Okay, we're not going to have tape machines. Okay, we're not going to have the concept of signal to noise is going to go away. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's definitely going to go away. And it's sooner or later, okay, going to mean that everybody can have a studio, which means sooner or later you're going to see sentences like Billie Eilish made the record in her bedroom. Yeah, I mean, some of that. Yeah, I suppose that that's really true, but it wasn't mastered in a bedroom. Okay, you can be sure. So if you saw that, which we did, we were lucky enough to see it relatively early. Okay, you said, okay, so now you have two choices. Okay, you either get scared of it or you fall in love with it. Me, I think there's only one choice. Why bother to get scared of it? No, I'm certainly not going to change. I don't have the power to change it. Okay, and anyway, on this particular dynamic, when it happened, there was no changing. It's like immersive. From Schroeder and down, Schroeder is that frequency or that range of frequencies that deal with low frequency information rather than high. Okay, and there is a Schroeder frequency calculation, but it's roughly 200 to 300 hertz in the rooms of our sizes. Very little has changed. Immersive isn't going to really change any of that. So what is immersive? Immersive is just another way of, getting more information coming from more different directions. Everybody's been trying, people have been dealing with this for a long time. So it's a standards war. It's a manufacturer's war. And, so when that happens, I just sort of sit back, okay, let you guys duke it out. But here's what we're not going to have. We're not going to not have immersive. And the creative process should probably happen in those rooms. Yes. And then checked on phones. Okay, so yes, every week there's another immersive studio, and that's fine. So that kind of conversation that I just had with you is one that we've had 10 times over my career at least. Whenever I see something that's interesting, there have been a few times when I said to myself, this is just getting pretty boring. I mean, I keep doing the same 30 and 40 rooms. They're all good. We're delivering excellent product, and we do have a business, but it's not really that interesting anymore. And then all of a sudden, a new idea will emerge. So the first time that happened is when I saw time delay spectrometry demonstrated. Okay, and then from that came measuring devices like SMART, now ESRA, et cetera. And now, of course, you can get it on a phone. Right. When you could finally get an impulse response that graphically showed you what you were hearing. I said, okay, now this is interesting. Now, because once you have data that accurately imitates what you can hear or parallels what you can hear, then you can deal with it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, well, that sound was very punchy. Okay, that might be true, but what am I going to do with that sentence? I can't do anything with that sentence. I mean, we can talk about it and we can have fun with it, but I can't empiricize with it and I can't design with it. I can write novels about it, so it's useful, but it's not useful if you want to start duplicating it. Yes. Why is that important? When you see in the last few years, and record of the year is, and it's someone I never heard of and I don't really care, what's interesting is that 25 people come up on the stage. That's interesting. And I don't have a problem with somebody else liking music that I don't like. There's a lot of music to go out there. But it used to be Song of the Year, Song of the Year, Producer of the Year, Artist of the Year, and a person went up. Okay. And then one year, Engineer of the Year, and Bob and Malcolm went up. Okay, and that was already unusual. They got to give out 2 Grammys. Now it's Song of the Year, and 25 people come up on the stage. Okay, now that's interesting. So what does that tell you? That tells you that song was written by 25 different people, and it was produced in 15 different studios. That's job security for me. We got to get those 15 studios to at least have some similarity to each other, because stuff's going to be moving around between the studios. So that's interesting. That's what digital technology did. Okay, so say whatever you want about all of this, and go back to what hasn't changed. The fundamental need for a listening environment to be cool, comfortable, and sound accurate hasn't changed in 52 years for me. And I thank Jimmy for that, because Jimmy is one of the first people, and obviously I'm a little partial to this story because I know the story. I don't have to research, who said, I want a control room that's big. I want the artist to be on this side of the glass because I am the artist. I am the producer, okay? And I want to have vibe in my room. I want to be able to make it all blue. This was not that common in 1968. So you have Beatles, Beach Boys, you have little figments of it creeping in the late 50s and early 60s with a Buddy Holly, wanting to produce himself and forcing the record companies to bend, okay? But it takes people like Jimmy, and of course now every studio is like that. So that's what stayed the same. And the record industry changed everything. So now everybody can have their own studio. Everybody's their own producer, okay? But the tools got cooler. So it's pretty obvious why studios got smaller, because they got easier to build. They're cheaper. There's going to be a few. Chris Stone is responsible for a seminal article. I'll never forget it. It was called Satellites and Motherships and Satellites. Remember that article? It was a long time ago, where he predicted that there would be a few mothership studios in key locations, and then there would be thousands and thousands and thousands of satellite studios. Okay, what he didn't quite get is that they could actually all be the same. But the basic concept was correct. Every major city that's got talent, got orchestras, et cetera, is going to want and will be able to support a few bigger studios with bigger rooms. Yes. After that, there's no more reason to have them. So, again, I think the artist pushes the technology. Some people think the technology gives the tools, and then the artists adopt to them. It's probably a little bit of both. I lean more towards the artist because I see the world through an artistic lens. I'm predisposed to see it that way, but I announce my bias right from the jump. So one of the things that's excited me a lot in the last 5 years is predictive analysis. Being able to predict, really, really accurately predict acoustic behavior in environments. So we started out in our office, it started out as an intern project. One intern, very smart guy, said, well, how's ABEC doing on non-rectangular rooms? Okay, let's find out. So let's take our non-rectangular rooms, you know what I mean by that, which, by the way, are most of the rooms we end up designing. Why? Because it's not that parallel walls are bad. That's a huge myth. That's another book I want to write, Myths in Acoustics. So that'd be myth number one, parallel walls are bad. No, that's a lot of baloney. Parallel hard reflective surfaces can cause flutter echo, and that can be disturbing, but that doesn't mean that parallel walls are bad. Okay, now back to the intern story, and Peter started looking at it, and he said, yeah, maybe we could create our own software. We now have a working software program called NIRO, Non-Iterative Room Optimization, that we use for all our projects, not for sale, okay? It's a service that we offer to other people, and we have four competitors using it. We have other acousticians using it. We're on the verge of something very interesting. Nobody really has this, because if they had it, we would know about it. We're at the conferences, we see. We now have about a dozen proof of concept studios. So mixed with the Masters, their new studio in Paris, Rue Boyer, just opened, use this for their rooms. So we've got endorsement. Jack Antonoff was literally the first person to use the room, said one of the 3 best rooms he's ever worked in. I don't know what the other 2 are. So this is exciting. So every now and then a new thing will come along, and it seems to come along every 5 years or so, just when I'm getting a little bored, when I'm getting kind of like, oh, this is really more of the same, a new thing will come along. Yeah.
And that's one of the beautiful things about being a creative person.
Yeah, and that's why I believe in a creative lens.
Yeah. I joke a lot that I consider myself a lead actor in short attention span theater. It's because once you've mastered something and the challenge is no longer there, you want to go on to something else.
Yeah, you want to try. Yeah, so it's been it's been a pretty good ride. I mean, as I said, at 76, certain things start to change. I was really, really lucky. I don't know. That's another thing that happened serendipitously. I had not really thought about the notion of how's this all going to end. When you are steeped and raised in an Ivy League architectural universe and you study, quote, the great masters, and the years that I was there, it was Corbusier and the Bauhaus. Okay. You see these famous, in many instances great, but in many instances, okay, architects, and they practice and then they die and the practice stops. It just stops. It doesn't have a leg. It doesn't go any further. I mean, it continues for a while and then it stops. There is no more office of Corbusier. There is no more Louis Kahn office. There's the sort of idea of a Frank Lloyd Wright office, but it's really this school. There's no more Frank Lloyd. It's so it just ends. What I had set up, without even realizing it, was a international global company with people that are really passionate about doing this work. And so there was a fork in the road. Okay, and a few of the key people approached me for some ownership. They wanted to get some ownership because basically we owned everything, Beth and I. And the other three companies, I owned half of them, and the people who were my representatives owned half. But I'm the key. And I turned to everyone. I said, "Do you want to keep doing this? When I'm as old as their parents. Most of them are all a generation younger." And so now I have partners. I mean, I'm still an important piece of the puzzle, but I don't run the day-to-day. There are moments when they need the gray hair. There's moments when they got to pull me in, and that's fine, and I'm okay. I can be used that way, but I'm much more interested in the higher level stuff, drawing review, research. I have a teaching schedule, mostly in the spring. Okay, it's ended now, although I'm doing a virtual LA thing in January. I actually don't have that much ego about my work. When people say you're the best, I stop them. I said, I'm okay with being one of the best. I know where I am. I know the award. I got it. I know who does it. Or I said, guys, can you just live with one of the best? I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You want to go with the best, let someone else take that moniker because it's kind of obnoxious. None of my kids, I have 4 kids, 2 are here, 2 aren't. A long time ago, it became apparent that none of them were going to go into the company. So when you don't have any of your kids, or at least one of them, wanting to jump in at any level, that changes your perspective a little bit about where this thing may go okay. And you've got a dozen passionate people who are long haulers. I got a lot of people 15 years and longer. It's a long time now.
It's a career. Yeah.
They're career people. They're not leaving. Yeah. Okay. So you put those 2 things in a blender and you press the button. You say, wait a second. Thus the story I just told you. So it really wasn't about legacy. It was really more about how do we keep it going? Well, the only way to keep it going is to get ownership shifted and to get responsibility shifted. This is where the teaching and the mentoring skills came in.
Yes.
Now, I will be the first to admit to you, or to whoever else, to the 11 people that are going to watch this video, that it hasn't been that it sounds easier than it is. It's one thing to say you're going to let go. It's another thing to actually really let go.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially if it's been your company for 50 years and you've been making the decisions. And it's hard both ways. Same thing with all the others. We've got about a dozen people now who are really in charge of things and running things. And I have to say, this last year was a turnaround year. This was really the first year where we're back in the office 4 out of 5 days. COVID as a scare is kind of at least in the rearview mirror. I mean, we still have it and it's still around. Actually, there's a little bit of a bump right now up north, but at least our lives are not being led in terms of that. I mean, It was just ridiculous.
Yes.
Okay, that idiot with the orange hair is gone, at least for the moment. So at least we can get back to some kind of moment when we talked to each other, we had differences of opinion, we expressed them, kind of found the middle ground, and then moved forward. That's kind of the diagram of how I grew up,
Yes.
and probably more what you grew up.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know, elections, okay, that guy won, everybody recovered, and then the next day we went back and built the interstate highway.
Yeah.
I mean, if in the 50s, everybody behaved the way they've been behaving in the last 4 years, you'd have no roads in this country. You'd have no roads.
Yeah.
You'd have no country.
You'd have no infrastructure.
You'd have no infrastructure. Okay, and if you don't pay attention, that infrastructure that has basically made America great is going to crumble.
Sorry, to.
So, exactly.
Yes.
So a lot of that is behind us now. So it's been a very, very cool year. And, you know, we're in a really, really sweet spot. We're good at what we do. We're not the best, but we're one of the best. We're passionate about what we do. And we also, you know, we got some gray hair. So
That means wisdom.
if you think about it, what's the first reason why most mistakes are made? Communication. Communication. It's 90% of all stuff is miscommunication. So let's go, what's the next 8%? Not knowing what the end looks like. How many times have I been with really, really good builders and they still fuck up the studio build? They just didn't know what it was supposed to look like. Now we actually have a tutorial to teach first-time studio builders studios. It's an actual 1-hour private tutorial that we give them because we advise them to go look at some studios. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what the end looks like. And for me, and maybe this is a good way to note, the other thing, there's no real playbook on this. I mean, you can, all these self-help books and shit, they don't really tell you how to do it. I mean, at the end, there's no real playbook on a lot of this stuff
Well, at the end, we're all just making it up.
We're making it up as we go along. Yeah.
Build the bridge as you walk on it.
Well,
I mean, I can't say that to an architect, okay, but
on the other hand, I was I was at Lowe's last night needing a piece of wood that I wanted them to cut for me because I didn't want to buy this big sheet of wood that I couldn't put in my car anyway and go to my son's shop. So they said, well, what do you want this for? I said 78.5. So they put a little mark on it. 78. I said, hold on. I go to my, 78.5. And I look at these two guys that are manipulating. I said, measure twice, cut once. So I mean, yeah, all these sayings, they all work most of the time, but not always all the time.
of course.
That's why you need a little.
You have to be flexible.
And that's why you need a little Yogi Berra, the great 10 philosophers. One of them's Yogi.
That's true.
What was it? 90% effort. The other half was talent or something like that.
Yes.
And everybody knew what he meant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or he showed them all. He has the most World Series rings of anybody. He's been in more World Series wins than anybody because they played in so many World Series.
Right.
Okay, and he says, if we won more games, I would have had more rings. Everybody knew what he meant. So, it's a tie, Yogi and Socrates. You need a little bit of both.
I love that.
This has been fun. I don't know where this is going to go, but we had some fun, and who knows, maybe a part 2 or whatever.
John Storyk, thank you for being my guest.
Well, thank you. Thanks for. Thank you, and I'm very honored that I'd even be in your series. And I must say it's gone a slightly different direction than other interviews that I've had, which sort of usually are career-oriented.
That is a good thing.
It is a good thing because you've kind of allowed us to just rock a little bit.
That's what I try and do with these.
Yeah, I mean, career-wise, that stuff's pretty easy to find now. It's the other stuff that's important. That's the other stuff that's fun.
Exactly. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.